I've never used one. I've never found the need for one. But yeah, the problem you generally get is these ground loop problems where you've got mains coming from different parts of the room on different lengths of mains cable, and that can cause problems with different voltages on the ground references for different bits of equipment, and that's where your ground loops come from. So if you start with one socket in the wall and fan out from there, so you put a plug board into that socket and then you plug other things into that plug board, and you have a kind of star arrangement, everything fans out from that one point. You can run an entire home studio on one wall socket without any trouble at all because it doesn't draw that much current.
Well, I suppose we can't really leave that subject without mentioning our old standby Deoxit D5.
Yeah, absolutely. Cleaning things up and naturally in the UK environment with the weather as it is, we tend to get a lot of humidity and we get a lot of corrosion and tarnishing of connectors. So, once a year or so, it's a good idea just to give everything a bit of a wipe over with something like Deoxit, which will remove that tarnish and give you better quality contacts.
Another question that comes up quite often is asking us about the difference between a plug-in emulation of something like a compressor and an EQ or the actual analog real thing. How much difference does it make, and does it depend on where it is in the signal chain? For example, if you want to go in through a compressor before you hit your audio interface, is that going to give you any kind of advantage?
Yeah, good questions. I think plugins these days are so sophisticated and so accurate that you can use them without worrying about quality issues at all. I think most of them these days are fantastically good, and I use them all the time. Using a hardware processor before you go into the door, well, yes, you can. And historically, of course, is what we used to do because that's the only option we had. The only downside with that is that once you've done it, you can't easily undo it. So if you compress your vocals, for example, going into the computer, then you've got compressed vocals to work with thereafter. Whereas if you record them straight and then compress in the computer, you can always change your mind and fiddle with settings later. If you're confident at what you're doing and you know the sound you want, then yeah, sure, go for it. Use compressors as hardware inputs. No problem with that. You just need to be sure what you're doing.
Yeah, the one place that hardware actually can come in useful is when you're using modelled guitar amplifiers, and just sometimes using your old analog overdrive pedal on the input will sound a little bit more natural than the digital emulation of the analog overdrive.
I'm not a guitarist, I'll take your word for it.
You're a bass player.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those people with golden ears sometimes say that they can tell a tiny difference. Maybe they can, but as an engineering friend of mine once said, will it affect the sales of the record? And I think the answer is definitively no.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. I mean, yes, I think if you compare things precisely, then of course you can hear differences. But then if you get two hardware compressors, you're going to hear differences anyway because of their age and the way that the tolerances vary and all the rest of it. The important thing is it doing the effect that you want it to do? Is it having the right effect? And if you need to turn a knob slightly more or less, then who cares? It's about the finished result, isn't it, really? And as you say, if it sounds right at the end of the mix, then it is right.
Yeah, and that's very true when it comes to all these emulations of vintage things that we're offered. And most of us have never heard the vintage original anyway.
Well, exactly. I mean, yeah, I've heard quite a few over the years, but nothing recently. Does it matter? No, not at all. What I'm looking for is, am I getting the compression effect I want? Is it doing the right EQ that I want? And if it's not, I'll try something else. It doesn't need to be exactly the same as something from 70 years ago.
Okay, thanks for that, Hugh. Another popular question relates to patch bays, which back in the analogue days, we all had banks and banks of the things and loads of cables sticking out the back. But with a digital studio, do we still need a patch bay?
In most cases, probably not. But I think a lot of it depends on what number of sources you have, how much you want to change them around, and how big your interface is. I mean, if you've got an interface with a lot of inputs, you can probably just have everything connected all the time and just select it on the input routing for the interface. If you've only got a small interface with maybe two mic inputs and two line inputs, maybe a patch bay would just help you route things around a little bit more easily than having to physically go to the interface and unplug and replug. So I think a lot of it depends on your personal situation. I like a patch bay because I was brought up with patch bays, but they can be more trouble than they're worth often.
Yeah, that's true enough. Dodgy contacts and dodgy cables, the probability of that multiplies as you start to add more patch bays. But sometimes it can be useful if you've got one of these audio interfaces like the one I've got, where two of the inputs are on the front panel and the other 6 inputs and all 8 outputs are on the rear panel. Sometimes it's useful to bring those out to a place where you can actually get at them. And it's also very useful if you've got the one piece of hardware that you want to plug into an insert point within your door. You can do that if you've got a patchbay, but I probably think that one strip of patchbay should be enough for just about any job these days.
Yeah, I think so. The only thing I'd caution is putting microphones on patch bays, at least on TRS jack fields.
Absolutely. I'd bring those out to an input panel which has just got dedicated XLRs on the front and just wire those straight into the connections that are on the back of the interface.
Yeah, I mean, the reason is that because of the way jack sockets work, plugging in and out when you've got phantom on can create some really nasty splats, and it has been known to damage both preamps and microphones. So if you're going to route microphones around, if you want the ability to patch microphones from different locations into different preamp inputs, then do it on an XLR patch panel rather than a TRS one.
That's good advice from someone who's obviously blown up lots of things in the past.
Not many, but I have blown some up, yeah.
There comes a time when you want to put your music online. What do you need to do to prepare it, to get it into a state where the streaming companies will accept it and it will sound good? I mean, some people are using remote mastering where you send your track off and it gets mangled up on a cloud and sent back to you. Others are using the one built into their DAW, like the mastering in Logic Pro. What do you think of all these things, Hugh?
As always with mastering, it's a combination of two main aspects. There's the technical aspect, and you mentioned streaming, which is the way most people are going to release their music these days. Most of the streaming companies have quite specific requirements about the average sound level, the integrated sound level, and the peak levels. So there's a technical aspect to make sure you get those pretty much right. And there's plenty of stuff online these days that tell you what different streaming companies want and allow you to compare your material with how it's going to sound online, and then you can sort of fine-tune the settings. So there's that. And then there's the artistic aspect of what a mastering person would do to your mix. And one of the most important things, usually with a real mastering person, is that they're going to listen to your mix on full range loudspeakers, which means they go all the way down to 20 hertz and all the way up to 20 kilohertz in a good room acoustic. They're going to hear things that you may not have heard at home and possibly need to fix those. So that's one benefit. The other is that it's a fresh pair of ears on your mix, and they might be able to tweak things in a way that brings a bit of extra life and quality and character to it. You don't get all of those things when you master with one of these automated processes, but a lot of them do add the shine, shall we say, in a kind of automated way.
Yeah, I think providing you've got a decent mix, they will give you a bit of a polish and get the levels right for streaming. I use the one in Logic myself quite often, and sometimes I argue with it, but not very often. Yeah, it's important to get your music right for streaming, but back in the old days, mastering was also used to make sure that all the tracks on an album sounded like they'd been recorded on the same planet. You know, you might have done them in different studios, different months, or even different years, and it made them all sound kind of homogeneous. These days, the way that we listen to music is not quite so album-based usually, so that aspect of it isn't as important as once it was, perhaps.
Yeah, I still like albums. I like music that tells a story as it goes along. But you're right. People tend to listen to individual tracks in their own playlists these days, rather than having to have tracks in an album that all work together sonically. So it's a different approach, isn't it?
Yep, but by and large, if your mix doesn't need a lot doing to it, then one of the automated systems will do a good job. But if you've got a big budget, you're going for a commercial release, then definitely get a human to do the job.
Good plan. Just coming back to that selection of speakers, upgrading speakers thing, I know you've got quite strong views about size of bass drivers in small rooms and that kind of thing. So what would you advise people to look for, Paul?
It depends on the size of your room. There's no point in putting a huge amount of bass into a little space that's maybe 2 meters by 3. It's just going to give you lots of low frequency problems. And I have a Studio B set up in my office upstairs at home, and it's a very small bedroom space. And so I've got a couple of speakers in there actually with 4-inch bass drivers. A 5-inch bass driver would be fine, but a 7, 8 or larger I think would cause problems because I'd be putting too much low end into a room that couldn't accurately reproduce it. So I think it's all down to picking something that works with your room size. If you have a garage studio, for example, then an 8-inch driver might work fine. If you've got a warehouse, then you can go up to a 12-inch driver. But in a small home studio, I'd still recommend around the 5-inch bass driver.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. And I'm labouring the point again, but it comes back to the whole room acoustics. In a small room, you tend to have all the standing waves in the room all tend to pile up on 1 or 2 frequencies. So you get very big peaks and dips in the frequency response at low frequencies. So putting more bass into the room tends to give you a very sort of one-notey character to the sound. It makes it really hard to hear what you're doing at the low end. So restricting the bass performance of the speaker by choosing a small speaker actually helps.